and welcome to Raisina Uphill on TIOL Tube. On this show, we bring you news about the challenges and controversies faced by the Indian bureaucracy.
We also take you through the lessons to be learned from an unfortunate outcome of a bureaucratic action that annihilated the entire family. But first, let's start with what is needed for a structural reform of the central civil services.
Last week, we spoke of the caste system prevalent in the Indian bureaucracy, with most central Group A services rising up against the IAS, presiding as the territorial Brahmins in the hierarchy. Today, we ask you, is the Indian bureaucracy bloated? Does the size and number of ministries and departments have a justifiable correlation with government functions? You decide the overload factor. Here are some facts. Truth is stranger than fiction. The government of India still maintains an anti-locust organization, even though we have not suffered any infestation of locusts for the last 20 years. Locusts are the small grasshopper-like insects that destroyed crops decades ago. This locust warning organization, established in 1939, continues to work under the Ministry of Agriculture with one field headquarter at Jodhpur and 10 locust circle offices in different parts of Rajasthan. We ask you, with modern technology, to zero in on any locust activity. Is this really needed?
Consider another example, the Dandi Salt March by Gandhiji in Gujarat against the imposition of salt cess was a key maker in India's struggle for independence. But long after independence, privatization and liberalization, the government of India still maintains the Indian Salt Service with 11 sanctioned posts under the administrative control of the Ministry of Commerce. Applicants of the Indian Salt Services are chemical engineers who appear for the prestigious Civil Services examination by UPSC. The Indian Salt Services is the smallest service.
Now let's look at India's postal service. With easy availability of modern communication technology, people have stopped writing letters. Postal activities are on the decline. So why is the Indian Postal Department one of the largest employers in India after the railways? Let's hear from Justice Mr. A.K. Mathur, who headed the 7th Pay Commission. Justice Mathur spoke with TIOL Tube from Jodhpur.
Postal service constitutes about a big chunk, maybe about 10 lakh of people. And there are other rural postal service also, which the government of India is not paying. They were clamoring that we must be given a regular pay scale and we should be merged into the part of the government.
India's EXIM policy governs trade, which is most likely conducted under the Open General License, with minimum restrictions. What then is the purpose today of an organization like the Directorate General of Foreign Trade that controlled imports and exports until 1991?
All these departments and services were relevant when locusts were a devastating menace, or when salt cess was imposed in the 1940s, or even when trade was subject to restrictions before liberalization, or when letters were the only mode of communication. Although the world and India have moved on, the government of India is still stuck with obsolete structures and refuses to adapt. What's more, since independence, the government has steadily added to the number of ministries, departments, and officials without revisiting the older structures.
Most of the hundreds of government committees appointed since independence to recommend administrative reforms have accused the Indian bureaucracy of being stuck in the past. With its sheer size and number of ministries and departments, overloading the decision-making system without fulfilling operational responsibilities. These are harsh words. So let's take a look at how heavy are the services.
There are three types of civil services. The All India services, which include the IAS, IPS and Indian Forest Service, the Central Group A services and the State Civil Services. In further divisions, each of the 5 categories of Central Group A services have several subcategories. To see how obscure Central Group A services and irrelevant departments are eating into the Consolidated Fund of India, let's figure out how many services are really there. But wait, are there 49 Central Group A services or 59? Or is it nearly 90 services? Surprise! Nobody has a clean figure. It seems neither the UPSC nor the Government of India are clear on the number of services recruiting into the ocean of the Indian bureaucracy. Let's hear Mr. Justice A.K. Mathur, Chairman of the 7th Pay Commission.
So we asked the UPSC also. And we asked the Government of India also. But they don't have a real figure with them.
A second Administrative Reforms Commission was appointed in 2005 that released 15 reports on various facets of governance like undue political interference, inadequate accountability mechanisms and capacity building. Let's look at some of these recommendations.
For years, most of these recommendations fell on deaf ears. For example, a lower age of entry ensures a young bureaucracy. A minimum tenure is meant to protect against frequent politically motivated transfers. Specialization at the senior levels creates core competency, but none of these reforms were implemented then. Why does the government appoint reform committees when there is no will to act on the recommendations? Let's find out from TIOL's founder editor, Mr. Shailendra Kumar.
Reform is like any bank locker. A keen commitment from both the bureaucracy and the government are key to implementation. Another issue is by the time the recommendations are made, the key people in the bureaucracy either retire or get shifted. So the recommendations often fizzle out. The political interference in the bureaucracy is too much for the system to handle as the changing colors of the bureaucracy. With the Prime Minister calling for transformational change as against the incremental change, the same objective needs to be set for even bureaucratic changes. A tectonic shift is the only answer to the present ills of the system. We need to be more open to new ideas of managing large workforce. The traditional tools like tenure security, etc. are not working well. Performance has to be given greater weightage. Too many services must be merged into a few services for easy management, or the government would be frittering away its political capital in dealing with unions.
Yes, the numbers have consequences too. Each of the various pay commissions have recommended the urgent need to reduce manpower and political interference, which have led to indiscipline, unionism, factionalism, and groupism in the Indian bureaucracy. The government did try to act on shrinking the ballooning bureaucracy simply by not filling up the vacancies. But such a wayward trimming policy had adverse consequences. Some departments that needed the officers struggled, while others were in surplus. Let's now look at how many employees does the government feed. Here is the total sanctioned strength of central government employees at various times since independence.
The government tried to bring in some administrative reforms, but none that could stem the rot. Acting on some of the recommendations, the Modi government tried to transform the bureaucracy at the senior level by proposing performance-based promotions or even foreseeable retirement for non-performers. Even transfer requests will now acknowledge the officer's honesty and efficiency, and certain senior posts would have fixed tenure to curb frequent transfers and political interference. The Modi government even favored lateral entry in the IAS, this as suggested by the Administrative Reforms Commission, but backed off due to serious opposition from the bureaucracy.
Reform efforts by the government are only minor changes, like putting a band-aid on a bleeding artery. Any serious administrative reform must address the bureaucratic structure and rationalization of a ballooning workforce. For example, when there is a central Indian Audit and Account Service, why have other separate account services like the Indian Railways Account Service or even the Indian Post and Telegraph Accounts and Finance Service? All the separate account services may well be merged within one central Audit and Account Service. Let's find out from Mr. Shailendra Kumar, TIOL's founder editor, how such restructuring from the roots can help the government.
Restructuring of the bureaucracy is essential to match numbers and skills with government functions. Any administrative reforms must consider merging, dismantling, or winding up obsolete departments. For example, with the GST subsuming excise and service tax, both these taxes would go. The role of customs is more of a trade facilitator than a regulator. So why not merge the Indian Trade Service with the Indian Custom and Excise Service? There are many such services which can be merged, and the government needs to take a hard look at it.
Trimming down the excesses, dismantling obscure services, restructuring the relevant ones or merging others will go a long way to making the services relevant to government functioning and also help to trim the bureaucratic bloat. After all, a bureaucracy with no work can be more dangerous. Let's now move on to our next story on whether the death of a bureaucrat and his family was a possible case of a human rights violation.
There were 4 deaths recently that shook the bureaucracy and the nation. Within 2 months, an entire family of 4 was annihilated. Were they driven to death, or is another arm of bureaucracy to blame? Was there a violation of human rights? In July this year, a Central Bureau of Investigation caught Balkrishna Bansal, a senior bureaucrat in a Ministry of Corporate Affairs, red-handed while allegedly accepting a bribe from a pharmaceutical company representative. The CBI arrested him. Cash and property papers were recovered from raids conducted at 8 locations.
2 days later, while Bansal was still in police custody, he heard that his wife and daughter had both committed suicide. They were perhaps unable to bear the humiliation of such an inquiry, especially when his daughter was soon to be married. The trial court, hearing Bansal's bail application, was compelled to comment that what was the need to arrest the bureaucrat, as charges of corruption were not a conventional crime like murder.
Months later, even as the CBI investigation continued, both Bansal and his son returned home and committed suicide rather than facing the CBI inquiry. However, each of them left behind a note reportedly accusing the CBI directly for harassment and senior officials for having abused and tortured his wife and daughter.
Even as the entire family was destroyed, their dying declaration veered off the investigation onto a new tangent. The nation was shaken up and the National Human Rights Commission accused the CBI of human rights violation. Do excesses in investigation constitute a human rights violation? Let's hear from Mr. Vikram Singh, IPS and former Director General of Police, Uttar Pradesh.
The entire family has been wiped out under the most tragic circumstances. And to add insult to injury, an FIR has still not been lodged under the guise that an inquiry is being conducted. You violated the CBI guidelines on investigation and searches by searching them after dark, searching them, which could have been postponed or avoided for the next few days because the daughter's marriage was almost fixed, so that you could have avoided that indignity to the Bansal family, and yet you chose to do exactly that.
So, what are the guidelines for an investigation to be conducted? Let's hear Mr. Ranjit Sinha, former CBI director.
CBI always takes help of the technical gadgets to arrive at the truth, and so far as my knowledge goes, the CBI never uses third-degree methods.
What are the CBI's scientific or technical methods of interrogation? Let's hear Mr. Vikram Singh, IPS and former DGP of Uttar Pradesh.
There is narco analysis, there is lie detector test, and today it is customary. In fact, Kerala has made it mandatory that all investigation and all questioning will have to be under videography.
When there are established guidelines, who will undertake moral responsibility of the death of an entire family? Let's listen to what Mr. Vikram Singh has to say.
The primary responsibility would vest with the investigator and the investigating team. But the 4 tiers of supervisors, they cannot wash their hands of the case, in the sense that they had a moral and official responsibility to see that things are as per the guidelines and the CBI handbook on investigations.
Bureaucrats are also worried because arrest and imprisonment are part of new laws like the New Companies Act and even the GST model laws. Will inquiries be stretched from pestering and provocation into the zone of persecution? Mr. Vikram Singh does think so. Let's hear him.
There's every likelihood of arrest to be abused. You may recall that 25 years ago, in such cases, CBI never used to go in for arrest till the courts mandated that the accused is not cooperating with the investigation, number one, or there's a likelihood of him going underground or absconding. It happened only in 5% of cases that a person who has a company, a person who is a senior IAS or an IPS officer, it's very unlikely that he will go underground. But if there's a possibility, by all means. But today the rule is that 95% of the accused are arrested. And in this case is also the new laws that have come up. Rest assured, the probability is that these provisions will be misused.
While the group of CBI officers are under investigation to assess whether there was a human rights violation, it is tragic that a family was driven to death, especially when the corruption has a degree of social acceptance in our society. On this note, we conclude this bulletin of Raisina Uphill. Thank you for watching.
We look forward to your suggestions and feedback at editor@tiol.in. Goodbye.